Well, good morning, everyone. I was going to say having all my colleagues back in real life all in one place feels like the first day of school. But that's probably not something we should be talking about. As a matter of fact, that is something we will be talking about in just a minute. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to all my colleagues for coming up. We're gathered here, of course, on Treaty 6 land. We acknowledge the Otipemisiwak Métis Nation with their long history and their deep connection to this land. So I've had a fun week. I did not think that I would be so emotionally invested in these municipal elections. Who knew? We all knew. But I just want to say a special thank you to all of the great folks, women and men across Alberta, who have been elected. It really means something to stand up and speak for your neighbors. It's hard to run. But I want to congratulate those who've been elected, our new mayors, our new councillors, reeves, and municipal officials. I want to especially thank the school board trustees who have stepped up in a difficult time for education. But I also want to thank everybody who ran, everybody who was brave enough to put their name out in front of their neighbors. We all know what that feels like. But I got to say, for those of us with municipal experience, it's even harder when it's just your name and not a party team with you, which is the case for most of them. So I want to thank all the volunteers who worked so hard to get their candidates, win or lose. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you got to meet a lot of your neighbors. And a particular thank you to the election workers. You had to deal with bad stuff. You had to deal with incredible long lines, processes and procedures that made no sense. A lot of people were very angry. And man, oh man, a lot of you stayed up really, really, really late. So thank you for doing it. We don't pay you a gazillion dollars. I know many of you do this cycle after cycle, election after election, and you are champions of democracy, and thank you for doing that. Now, the election did come with a lot of challenges. We've all heard the frustrations around the lines, around the low voter turnout, around the terrible new rules, and I just want to be clear about one thing. We need to do better. Our society works when people get to vote. And when you suppress people's vote, when you make it harder to vote, when you have hours-long lineups with seniors who are standing there waiting, sometimes in the cold outside, when you ask people to constantly continue to prove things by filling out a form when they're already on a list, these are just things that are designed to suppress the vote. I don't believe in making it harder for people to vote. I believe in making it easier for people to vote. And certainly this government, as they always do, imbued with conspiracy theories from the US, didn't think about the implications of their ideological decision. Didn't think about how hard it is on that 70-year-old campaign worker and what she's going to have to do. They didn't think about what it meant to incredibly long lineups. And yeah, we can say these are first world problems. We get to live in a democracy, just shut up and stand in line for an hour. But we can do so much better than that. We can do so much better. And this comes from having a respect for local democracy and having a respect for municipal officials. And clearly the government doesn't have even that. But that's not my topic for today. We've got some other things to talk about. First of all, we want to share a little bit about our summer. What we did on summer vacation, which was not much of a vacation, how the last 4 months went, what we heard, and how that's shaping our legislative agenda as we stand up, as Alberta's New Democrats stand up for Albertans this fall. We've also heard a little bit from the government on their legislative agenda. Surprise, surprise, the priorities of Albertans and the government's legislative agenda do not match. But we'll tell you a little bit about our goal there. Before I turn things over to Deputy Leader Raki Pancholi, I want to take a moment to congratulate and thank all the folks standing behind me. I actually hate making them stand behind. We call it a human wall. I don't like it. But I wanted to do it today on purpose because they have worked so hard this summer. And I want to just highlight and congratulate and thank them for the work they were doing. They put in countless hours. Raki will tell you more in a minute. But over the course of this summer, our team, our volunteers, activists, and citizens across this province have knocked on over 200,000 doors. We have attended everywhere where people gather in community, whether it's a music festival or a dog park. We've been to endless summer barbecues. We did have some fun. But by and large, we were talking to Albertans. We had hosted 10 town halls across the province. Over 3,500 Albertans joined us in person. We've hosted innumerable online town halls with thousands more Albertans. And that's because these folks take their job seriously. Tomorrow, I will step into the legislature for the very first time. And you know, when you're in this position, people are like, what are you going to wear? What are you going to say? What are we going to clip for the internet? What's your speech going to be like? How are you going to attack the other guys? We will do all of those things, and hopefully I will wear something appropriate. But I'm going to walk into that legislature with a sense of enormous awe. Fewer than 1,000 people in the history of this province have been given by their neighbors the ability, the awe-inspiring ability to hold in their hands, even for a second, their neighbors' hopes and dreams and fears. It's service, sure, but it's also a deep responsibility. And I am so proud of all of my colleagues standing behind me today because every one of them shares that deep sense of responsibility. We take this seriously. This isn't about scoring political points for us. It's not about a wrestling match where we beat the other people down. It's about fundamentally determining how we can build a better Alberta for everyone lucky enough to live here. A better Alberta for all of us. We take that job very seriously. And we will lead with integrity, we will lead with respect, and we will lead with always, always, always keeping an eye on what we can do to make life better for everyone lucky enough to share this land. So with that, let's hear a little bit about what we're going to do. And I'll start by turning it over to Deputy Leader Raki Pancholi, who's going to give her essay on my summer vacation.
Thank you, Naheed. I can assure you that I had a very incredible summer, and so did all of my colleagues. We talked to people, Albertans from the north part of the province down to the south, Grand Prairie, Edmonton, Spruce Grove, Sherwood Park, Canmore, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge. I'm sure I even missed some of the communities we were in. We were talking to so many Albertans, and we wanted to talk to them about what it meant to be better together. And I have to tell you that the outcomes of those discussions that we had actually wasn't what we expected it was going to be. Originally, when we launched this Better Together Summer, we wanted to push back against the separatist rhetoric that was being elevated and championed by the Premier. But what we found, not surprisingly really, was that Albertans wanted to talk about the real issues that are impacting their daily lives right now. And the themes that we heard in all of these town halls again and again were that Albertans wanted to talk about education, about healthcare, about affordability, and about jobs. On education, we heard from a math teacher in Calgary who started her career at her school with 1,100 students and a full team of teachers. That was years ago. Today, with the same number of teachers, no increase at all, that team is now responsible for 1,800 students. That is a 64% increase with the same number of teachers. On public health care, we heard from a woman in Canmore who spent her life as a proud nurse serving her community. Today, she says she's embarrassed to admit that where she's from when she talks about health care. And worse, as someone who now relies heavily on the public health care system, she fears that every single day she won't get the life-saving care that she needs to get when she needs it. And on affordability and jobs, we heard from a young, hardworking Albertan in Airdrie who went to school here in our province and is increasingly losing hope. He's stuck in a job that doesn't pay enough to cover his bills and feels weighed down by student debt, and he actually feels lucky to have a job because many of his friends don't even have one. At a time in his life when he should be filled with possibility and opportunity, he's feeling discouraged, trapped, and unsure if he can ever get ahead. These are just examples of the hundreds of stories that we heard from Albertans all across the province about the challenges that they're facing today. Healthcare, education, jobs, cost of living, this is what Albertans' priorities are. Now, don't get me wrong, we did hear about separatism as well. We heard concerns about pensions and strong support for staying in the CPP. We heard about the economic risks of tearing Alberta out of Canada. We heard that Albertans are tired of the divisive rhetoric, and they too believe that we are better together. We heard from Albertans who are proud Canadians. And for anyone who's interested in reading our full report on what we heard during our Better Together Summer, I invite you to visit bettertogethersummer.ca. So now I'm going to turn things back over to Nahed to talk about what we're going to do next with the things that we heard.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Raki, for that. And as you heard from Raki, we have now released our What We Heard document as of today. You can find that at bettertogethersummer.ca, along with a really nifty little documentary that we filmed over the summer with the voices of real Albertans, and occasionally my voice, talking about where Albertans really are. And we really encourage people to visit bettertogethersummer.ca, watch the documentary, read the document, and continue the conversation. So Albertans have, in fact, made it very clear what their priorities are, and frankly, we don't see those reflected in any way in the legislative agenda that the government released earlier this week. There's nothing in there on affordability or cost of living. There's nothing in there on insurance or how much we pay for utilities or on housing. There's nothing in there, certainly nothing in there, about increasing the lowest minimum wage in the country. The only bills that have anything to do with education are a potential bill to force the teachers back to work and one to force trans kids even further into the closet, using for the first time in Alberta's history the notwithstanding clause. There's literally nothing in there about healthcare. Some statute amendments, but nothing that is going to make healthcare better for any Albertan. This government's priorities are misguided, but ours are not. Alberta's New Democrats stand with Albertans, and we stand with trying to make this place just a little bit better for everybody. First of all, of course, we're amidst the largest public sector strike in Alberta's history. People are struggling to put food on the table. Everyday Albertans are increasingly wondering if they can rely on their healthcare system to work for them. We all have stories. I'll share mine. A gentleman broke his hip at the Stampeders game a couple of weeks ago. Didn't realize how bad it was, tried to walk home, collapsed in the sidewalk in front of his house. Called an ambulance. Lives very close to the Foothills Hospital. No ambulances were available. They had to redirect an ambulance from the South Health campus. It took 25 minutes to pick up this guy who couldn't move with a broken hip. And as he put it to me when I talked to him last night, he can walk really much better now, thankfully. And as he put it to me when I talked to him last night, what if that had been a heart attack? And I said, well, you'd be dead. That's what the healthcare system is today. Albertans feel like this is very heavy. Times are hard. People are struggling, people are underwater. And what do we have on the docket this fall? Legislation to allow a citizenship marker on your driver's license to make voting even more complicated. Oh yeah, and let's not forget, new license plates that not one person in this province asked for, and in fact, Danielle Smith and Rob Anderson and Bruce McAllister, when they were MLAs, said that was the worst possible distraction. And yet, here we are. Unlike this government, we don't set our priorities based on political ideology or what Tucker Carlson said last week, or what we think will get our base excited about voting for us again, or what will continue perpetual anger in a rage machine. We set our priorities based on what Albertans need. We listen and we build that plan. So here's our plan. First of all, we will vigorously oppose any back-to-work legislation this government attempts to table. That's right. Alberta's New Democrats stand with parents, Alberta's New Democrats stand with students, and Alberta's New Democrats stand with teachers. This government has not been at the table in a serious way since before the spring. They offered a deal to teachers that teachers massively rejected, and then all summer, instead of working on a better deal, instead of finding some money, instead of figuring out what teachers really wanted, the government did nothing. They took a summer vacation. And when they came back, they offered the teachers the exact same deal they had already rejected, except with free COVID shots, which, by the way, everyone should get. And they thought that $100 free COVID shot would somehow make the teachers vote for the deal. Of course they didn't. What did the government think was going to happen? Since then, the government has resolutely refused to come back to the table. They will not table a deal. They will not table a proposal because they knew with 4-seat majority, they could force the teachers back to work. And while that will reopen the schools, it certainly is not a fair deal for the teachers. It's not a fair deal for the students. It doesn't solve the problem. And the problem is very simply that under the UCP's rule in the last 6 years, the quality of public education in this province has declined shockingly and significantly. You know, I always talk about the great education I got when I graduated from high school. I think that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. But we're not talking about ancient history here. Kids in grade 5 today are getting a much worse quality of education than their older brothers and sisters did, kids in high school today. This is how fast the UCP has allowed our education to decline with the lowest per student funding in the entire country. And forcing the teachers back to work solves none of that. It violates their right to collective bargaining. It violates their right to actually advocate for themselves and for their students and for their co-workers, and it doesn't solve the problem. But once again, this government has never been interested in solving problems. This government would rather fight than win, and this is just yet another fight instead of getting it right for generations of students. It's worth mentioning as well that a lot of these students are still suffering learning loss from the pandemic, and we're pouring on extra learning loss. This is not a political game. It's not about hanging out in the legislature. These are profound losses that will stick with these students for life. The good news is, if you broke it so fast, we can fix it fast. And we should be able to fix it fast, but it will require government with the will to do that, with the brains to do that, and with the compassion to do that. And we just haven't seen any of that from this government. We will also be bringing forth legislation through the powers that we have. We'll be bringing forth affordability proposals, cost of living proposals to protect your paycheck. Those will include proposals to increase the minimum wage, proposals to protect tips for service workers, and a whole bunch of other things, including ways to bring you relief at the grocery store. With the recent release of Justice Wyant's report on healthcare corruption allegations, the Justice confirmed that some of what we knew was true. That there were cushy insider deals, that procedures weren't followed, that friends of this government received contracts for hundreds of millions of dollars. Justice Wyant did not find anything to be false in all the allegations, the shocking allegations that we've heard. He did, however, highlight that he didn't have the ability to ask the right questions to the right people, that people refused to talk to him, people who talked to him refused to answer certain questions, and he didn't believe some of the people who talked to him, but he didn't have the right to ask them to take an oath. So once again, we will continue to push for a full, transparent public inquiry into the corrupt care scandal. A public inquiry that will finally bring light of day to all of these terrible allegations, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, diverted from the healthcare system, diverted from getting you a family doctor, reducing wait times, keeping ERs open, diverted to cushy deals with UCP insiders to buy medication that nobody's heard of, that doesn't work, that nobody wants. We can do so much better. And I'll be very clear, there's a simple adage, and it's true in this case. The only governments that resist transparency are governments with something to hide. And we know that's why this government doesn't want a public inquiry, because they'd rather cover it up. And Albertans will not stand for that. So this fall, you will see from Alberta's New Democrats real action on cost of living, on jobs, on healthcare, and on education. I'm going to turn things over to our House Leader, Christina Gray, who will give us a bit of a rundown on the government's legislative agenda and our response to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. So the government's fall legislative agenda completely misses the mark, and we're very excited as your official opposition to go in with this fantastic team to introduce real proposals that Albertans are asking for out of all of the conversations we had during the Better Together summer. There are urgent priorities right now, from education to healthcare to affordability, and Albertans know that they can count on their Alberta New Democrats to fight for them and to fight for the issues that they care about. The UCP government agenda has not and does not deliver for Albertans and their families. We will be in the legislature holding them accountable for that, and I will turn things over to Nahed to close this off.
Well, thank you, Christina. Thank you, Raki. Thank you to all of you. How are you doing? Need to do some deep knee bends? Thank you all so much. This is what we're fighting for this fall. We're fighting for Albertans. We're fighting for the issues that Albertans have told us matter the most to them. The cost of living, education, healthcare, and jobs. But I want to say one last thing. And the last thing is this. We started this summer wanting to have a conversation with Albertans about separatism. And we quickly found that it's not that Albertans didn't want to talk about it. It's that Albertans had much bigger priorities. But Albertans also wanted to talk about separatism. And they made one thing very, very clear. Albertans are proud Canadians. Yes. Alberta's New Democrats are proud Canadians. We will always fight for Alberta's place in Canada, but we will always fight for Canada. This is a big country. It's a country with a history of thousands and thousands of years, with a recent history of 160 years. It's big, it's messy, it's bruised, it doesn't always work well, but it is the greatest place on earth. Absolutely. Earlier this summer, Premier Danielle Smith was asked, "Why are you pandering to the separatists?" And in a rare moment of lucidity and clarity, she didn't say, because Alberta needs a better deal, because the federal government isn't working, because I hate Canada. She said, if I don't pander to the separatists, I might lose the next election. So Premier Smith, you're going to lose the next election. Yeah. But you're going to lose the next election. You're going to lose the next election precisely because you pandered to separatists. Yeah. You're going to lose the next election precisely because you take Albertans for granted. You're going to lose the next election precisely because you don't think Albertans are smart enough to see what you're doing. And no amount of license plates, no amount of asking 12-year-old girls to prove their sex, not the boys, just the girls, is going to save you. Because Albertans know that our country, our province, our kids, our grandkids, and our future is worth so much more than Danielle Smith's political skin. And we are going to fight like hell for this country, and we're going to fight like hell for a better Alberta, because Albertans know that we are better together. So, we would be very happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Leader, Deputy Leader, and House Leader. We'll begin by taking...
That's a lot of leaders, Andrew.
There's a lot of leaders. We have a group of leaders. We will begin by taking questions in the room. If you can please state your name and where you're from. And online, if you're joining us, please raise your hand if you'd like to get a question. We'll come to you after taking 2 questions in the room here.
Jack Frell with the Canadian Press. First, any special guests for tomorrow's Throne speech?
Oh, so many. My whole family is coming. My mom is going to be there. Every one of us has invited citizens, activists, people who do great work in their community. I'm mostly excited about my mom. And Gritej, hopefully your family is going to be there too for our first day. And also we've made a special priority to invite teachers and education workers so that they can see that we're fighting for them.
On the teachers front, like you guys say that you're going to vigorously oppose back to work legislation, but what does that actually mean? Like, are you guys going to filibuster as much as you can if you get the chance? Like, what exactly does vigorously oppose mean other than in words?
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to Christina in a minute, who can tell you a little bit more about the House rules around all of this. I will tell you that for me, the frustrating thing, which I know is the frustrating thing for many people in the system, is everyone wants the schools to be open again. Everyone wants students to be back at their desks, and teachers want to be back at work. But this is not the way to do it. And we know that the government will be able to pass that legislation. They have a small majority. So unless members of the UCP caucus suddenly get religion, ethics, competence, and values, that legislation will pass. But we do have some tools in our place to make sure that Albertans understand who is standing up for students, who is standing up for parents, and who is standing up for teachers. And Christina can tell you a little bit more about that. But I do understand, and tell me if I'm wrong, Christina, that the leader of the opposition gets to speak before they call closure, before they use time limitations to end the debate. And the leader of the opposition gets a really, really long speech. Just saying. Over to you, Christina.
When it comes to the introduction of back to work legislation, we're going to have to wait and see the form of the bill that is introduced and what strategy the government is putting forward. But our job as the official opposition in the Alberta legislature is going to be to represent parents, students, and teachers in talking about the impact of this legislation and talking about the impact of this legislation in the context that the government has not done anything to address the fundamental issues that this strike is about: class sizes and complexity, fairness for teachers, having the lowest per funding student rate in the entire country. It's unfortunate that the government is already talking about this rather than getting back to the collective bargaining table. And our official opposition stands ready to oppose using the tools that we have. Leader.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question.
Hi, Sean Amata with City News.
Hi,
Question
Sean.
for you. You mentioned learning loss. What do you say to parents who don't want you to oppose back to work legislation? No doubt there are some parents in Alberta who are frustrated. They want their kids back in schools. They don't really care how. Maybe they're saying the government has put some money on the table and they can sort things out later. So what do you say to those parents who don't support you on this?
We've been talking to parents across the province, and I have not spoken with a single parent who wants the schools to be closed. I haven't spoken with a single parent who doesn't desperately want their kids back in school. The levels of frustration vary depending on the child. But every single person wants their kids back in school. But I have yet to hear from a parent who doesn't also say, I stand with the teachers. And this is not the way to do it. The government has not been serious about negotiating. Is that malice? Are they trying to break the public education system totally by using the strike as an excuse? I mean, maybe. The Premier, after all, 7 years ago, after she was a seasoned politician and a school board trustee who got fired, wrote a piece, not for fun, which said we should dismantle all government schools and their government unions and we should have no public education. Maybe that's what she's doing. Maybe they're just incompetent. Her comments on labor relations across the board have clearly come from a book called How Not to Do Labor Negotiations 101. She's had so many unions at the brink of strike. Even when unions have accepted the offers, they've done so by very narrow margins, meaning you've got a grumpy workforce, which is harder to get productivity out of. And I have yet to hear from a parent who says, reopen the schools exactly the way they were before, with my kid in a 44-student class in grade 4. With the inability for kids with special needs to achieve any educational assistance. So the government has proposed, outside of the collective agreement, no way to hold them accountable to it, that we will hire an additional 0.5 education assistants per school in Alberta. That we will hire an additional 1 teacher per school in Alberta. This is not going to solve the problem. We need to get back to the Peter Lougheed vision that we can have the best public education system in the world. The UCP broke it. We'll fix it when we come into power. But we're hoping that the UCP will at least try and make a deal that addresses some of these concerns. Because even if you say, well, go back to work and we'll figure it out all later, when's later? Kids don't have forever. We have to fix it now.
The government's also indicated that they're going to amend election laws, essentially making it harder for people to run for MLA. Just wondering what you think about that, and if the true goal here is to prevent 214 candidates from getting on a ballot like we saw in a recent by-election, is that something that you could support?
I mean, look, I wish I knew what their true goal was. You know, when the minister first introduced this, he didn't say, we want you to have more signatures, we want to make it harder for people to be nominated. You know, depending on the details, it's something we could absolutely talk about. He literally said, we want to make it harder for people to run for office. Democracy isn't about making it harder for people to run for office. And in fact, their campaign finance laws make it harder for people to run for office by making you have to raise exorbitant amounts of money just to get your word out. You know, here in Edmonton, we have a mayor-elect who spent something like 1/7 what the person running against him spent. I spent 1/3 of what a guy who's now the Speaker of the House spent when I ran against him in 2010. But those exceptions prove the rule. Every single thing this government is doing is making it harder for people to vote and harder for people to run and theoretically easier for their hand-picked folks to win. That's not democracy. It's fundamentally anti-democratic. As always, we will look at all the legislation with a common sense lens, and if it's a legislation that makes sense, we don't mind supporting it. But if what Minister Scow said is true, that the entire goal is to make democracy harder, then that's not something we can support.
Well, we shouldn't have 214 candidates on ballot, should we?
Well, look, it's irritating, okay? It's frustrating. But it works. Pierre Poilievre still got elected, right? Justin Trudeau still got elected when they did it against him. So at the end of the day, democracy can be messy and inconvenient, but that doesn't give government the right to stop it.
All right, we're going to turn to our online guest today. So with their hand up right now, Alexandra from Lethbridge Herald, you're up.
Following the teacher strike, and can you just talk about the misinformation that is being spread to parents about teachers and about the negotiations and how harmful that is?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I had earlier said that the Premier Smith seems to be negotiating out of the How Not to Negotiate handbook. Somebody needs to give her a copy of Trump's The Art of the Deal. Maybe that would help. But I was kidding. My staff are always like, don't kid. But what we're really hearing, it's not true. What we're really hearing is the government using government money, using taxpayer money to run a misinformation campaign against the teachers. I would much rather that money go to the students' classrooms. And what they're saying needs to be contextualized. So they're using these huge numbers. We're going to hire 3,000 teachers. We're going to have 1,500 EAs. But first of all, that's not in the collective agreement. They haven't actually budgeted for it. And those numbers sound big, but in the context of the system we have in Alberta, 93% of kids go to public schools. There are over 3,000 schools in the province. These numbers are really a drop in the bucket. They're not nearly as big as they sound. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that. You know, another one is they've said, the Premier recently said, we're going to build 100-odd new schools. Well, when the New Democrats were in power, we built or modernized over 200 schools in 4 years. The UCP have been in power 6 years. They've barely done 65. And while they announced this huge plan to build new schools, we have a 3-year budget in front of us that does not have $1 towards the construction of these new schools. So parents deserve to know the truth. And the UCP has been dealing in misinformation, sometimes blatant lies, but they deserve to know the truth. And we will continue to provide them with the real facts and the truth as much as we can. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and the students wouldn't necessarily be let back into the same school if they
Yeah, so this was a shocking thing because although the UCP government and Premier Smith engineered this strike, they were very ill prepared for it. And so the day before the strike, they printed off a bunch of worksheets off the internet and said, this is okay, this is good for home learning. I used to be a teacher, you know. I was a professor. And if I tried to do that, I'd probably lose my job. Also, if I said students should be spanked, I would lose my job, just saying. But they also cobbled together this $30 a day thing. I've got a lot of parents behind me. In fact, I've got a lot of kids here who've come for the legislature because they're not in school. We're happy to have you all. So I will, without even turning around, I'll ask my parents behind me, how's that 30 bucks working out for you? Did you find any camps? Find any place to put your kids for 30 bucks? How about the worksheets? Are they mitigating your concern with loss of learning of your students? Amanda Chapman, are you behind me? Yeah. 3 kids. 3 kids, Shadow Minister of Education. How they doing?
Well, they're not doing any learning off those worksheets, that's for sure.
So clearly what's happening is not working, but what you highlighted in your question is one particularly insidious piece, which is the government has pointed out correctly that there are online learning opportunities that are still going on because they're offered by schools that are not on strike. So I know a lot of parents would be sorely tempted to put their kid into online learning so that they can keep going. But as you say, it means removing your child from the public system. And with overcrowded schools, there is no guarantee your child will be able to go back to their neighborhood school. Was this on purpose or was it an oversight? I don't know. But it's very clear that despite engineering the strike, despite desperately wanting the strike to happen, the government had no plans for what to do when the strike happened.
All right, we're going to turn back to the room here.
Hi, Cindy Tran with the Edmonton Journal. I wanted to ask about the proposals that the NDP will be bringing forward. I understand the protecting tips has already been brought forward, and given the priorities that you've mentioned in terms of healthcare, that kind of thing, I'm wondering if you might be able to touch on other proposals that will be brought forward.
Yeah, I can't say too much about the specific proposals right now because there are parliamentary rules about talking about bills before they are introduced. But I can tell you that our broad theme for the fall on affordability and jobs issues is protect your paycheck. And so the idea here is people are feeling further and further behind. Something like 50% of households in Calgary are now facing food insecurity. People are feeling more and more underwater. And we don't need that. You know, particularly, we can talk a lot about folks who can't work and the government's intensely cruel work with people with disabilities, for example. But a fundamental thing that we also believe is if you are able to work and you are working, if you could get up in the morning and put on your pants and pack your lunch and go to work every day, you deserve to live a life without financial fear. You deserve to live a life where you're not scared at the grocery store, where you're not putting things back on the shelf before you get to the till. You deserve to live a life where if your fridge breaks, you're not worried about paying rent that month. And so one of the critical things that we're going to be working on is ensuring that people who are working have decent wages and are able to live a life a little bit freer of financial fear. So we're going to be doing a number of things that way. I'm particularly excited about one thing that I can't tell you about, particularly based on some news we heard this morning about the cost of increased grocery prices. So I'm very excited about putting forth a motion that I hope the government will support that will really make a big difference for people at the grocery counter. So these are the things we're working on. We will also, over the course of this session and into the new year, be talking about our plans on utilities and our plans on insurance, which are 2 of the big costs directly under the control of the provincial government where they have made a mistake.
The other thing I want to ask about is measles. So Canada is slated to lose its designation as a country that has eliminated the disease on Monday. I spoke to one doctor. He said that, yes, Canada should be losing it because it's an indication of where public health is at. I'm wondering what your reaction is to that and this healthcare system as well?
Well, let's be clear that Alberta is a leader in one area in Canada under the UCP government, and we are a leader in bad public health. So we, of course, had more measles outbreaks than the entire United States, a place with 100 times our population. Over the course of this summer, we have a Minister of Public Health who still cannot utter the words, "get your kids vaccinated." We were the first jurisdiction in Canada to start charging people for the COVID vaccine. The rollout of the seasonal influenza vaccine has been an absolute shambles. I still don't know if I can just walk up to a pharmacy and get my flu vaccine. In fact, one of my colleagues here went to the pharmacy to get their flu vaccine and also got their COVID vaccine, which was not supposed to be available at the pharmacy. So this entire thing is an absolute shambles. Our vaccination rates are the lowest they've ever been, and people are getting sick. And I don't need to remind anybody that we lost a newborn baby to measles this summer. That's the legacy of bad public health decisions. So next week, I'm going to invite you all back. I will wear a t-shirt, and I will get my flu shot. And I'll use that as a moment to talk to people about the importance of vaccination, because we have a government that refuses to do that.
All right, our next question in the room.
Hi, thanks. It's Lisa Johnson with the Canadian Press. On that topic, COVID vaccinations, the next phase of bookings, I believe, opened on Monday.
For next year.
But I'm wondering how you think that the rollout in terms of people being able to access and make their appointments, like this year, this fall, to make their appointments has gone, and if you've had any personal experience.
I do.
You know, going through that that system. We've heard of like a bottleneck with calling 811. What your experiences have been like.
I do, and I have. And this is just very symbolic of this government's inability to actually do stuff. You know, I've said many, many times that this government is more interested in scoring political points than doing the hard work of governing. We saw it in the municipal elections this week. We've seen it in the rollout of the vaccine. They make these pronouncements from on high and then don't resource or facilitate the actual work in getting it done. So I'll give you my own personal example, which is the government many times changed the criteria for who was eligible in phase one. And the final time that the minister changed the criteria, I was eligible. I will point out that this is not my diagnosis, but anyone with anxiety is eligible, and who in Alberta does not have anxiety under this government? But I am eligible. And so I thought, great, I will get my COVID shot. I have a chronic condition that fits on the list. I haven't been able to get through to 811. I haven't been able to book it online. And I'm starting to get nervous that there won't be any left by the time I actually get an appointment. And, you know, we're seeing this throughout, and even for pharmacists. There are a number of pharmacists in the province who've just bought private vaccines that they're selling, not using the government. But even those folks are on the hook if nobody uses the vaccine before it expires. There's no system in place. And here's just an interesting thing for you, Lisa, that I think you might enjoy. The government paid COVID vaccines are calling that $100 fee an administrative fee, which most private insurance plans won't cover. But if you buy one, a private one through a pharmacy, your private insurance plan is likely to cover it as a drug. So that was nobody's intent, but it's a mess. And the thing about this mess is it's people's lives. My mom needs that vaccine. I need that vaccine because I live with an 84-year-old with a compromised immune system. And let's not forget that we'd love to pretend the pandemic is way behind us. Thousands of Albertans died of influenza and thousands of Albertans died of COVID last year. And so this isn't fun and games. This isn't about scoring ideological points or still being mad at AHS because they made us wear masks that one time. It's actually about people's lives. And Albertans deserve so much better than what this government is giving them in public health. I have an 84-year-old roommate. Everybody knows that.
Just conscious of time, we have time for one more in the room, and if anyone online has their hand up, we'll be able to take one last question online. I'll pass it back over here.
Catherine Gurkowski, All Alberta. Thinking back to the 2002 strike, there was some thoughts on how to address learning loss, and they thought maybe extending the school year until they saw how much it was going to cost to pay teachers all that extra amount. What are your thoughts on how we address that learning loss?
Well, there's a couple of things there. The first is that we've got to be realistic, particularly for older students, about how we're going to get them ready for their diploma exams, get them ready for university, college, trade school admissions. You know, I heard a story this week about a young man who decided to spend his time during the strike applying for scholarships. But the scholarships require a reference letter from a teacher. And the teachers cannot write reference letters while they're on strike. And this kid missed all the deadlines because the scholarships refused to adjust the deadlines for Alberta students. So Alberta students are falling further and further behind. This is deeply troubling. It's worth noting that after the 2002 strike, the then government actually put together a task force on how to fix all the problems and then never implemented any of the advice of the task force. It wasn't until the New Democrats came in that we really took this issue seriously. But now, we can no longer rely in the education system on the goodwill and good hearts of teachers and education assistants and education workers. The system is broken. And we actually have to fix it to solve the learning loss for the kids today, but also to solve the learning loss for the kids who come after.
Okay. And on back to work, there's a few mechanisms that the government could potentially use that wouldn't even, that they could do before even second reading. They could call a public emergency tribunal. In the past, they've made bills take effect upon first reading. I'm wondering, I know the strategies are going to change depending on what tack they take, but can you elaborate on what you're going to do in and out of the House?
Yeah, well, you know, tomorrow I understand that there is going to be what is probably the largest rally that we've ever seen at the legislature, parents, teachers, and students from across the province coming to express their displeasure. The fact that the Calgary Stampede is making breakfast for the teachers before the rally tells you a lot about how deep the support for teachers is. And I want to really reach out to citizens and say, look, we'll do our part. We've got a certain special role, the 38 of us, in that dome. But we need you to do your part, which is we need citizens to keep up the pressure on their MLAs, on the provincial government. We need folks calling their Conservative MLAs. You can call us too, we like to take the calls, but we also need you to call your UCP MLAs and tell them that the way they're dealing with the teachers is unacceptable. And yes, there are a number of different techniques the province can use. Some of them I know they're nervous to use because they don't want to test the constitutionality of them. You know, the Supreme Court has said that there is a constitutional right to collectively bargain, and a lot of these rules in Alberta have not been tested against that ruling. So they're going to be very scared in order to do that. But they are going to try to ram this through. Let's make no mistake. They're going to ram it through as fast as they can. And Christina's job as the best House leader in the world, okay, in Canada, is to make sure we do everything we can so that there is a fair debate and they don't ram this through. Did you want to add to that, or did you want to add to that?
No, I think that's complete.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
And seeing no questions online, we've concluded for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Okay,
Hang on,
knee
hang on.
bends, stretch.